How you doing? Hi, you're watching Tito Talks, non-life insurance discussions. My name is Miguel. Thank you so much for joining us today for this short discussion on acts of nature and acts of God, as indicated in our title. If you're new to this channel, hi, welcome aboard. We're happy to have you here. Tito Talks, non-life insurance discussions is a channel that is all about non-life insurance topics being made easy to understand for both agents and clients. So if you're already in the field selling insurance and you're struggling explaining certain concepts to your customer, you may find the answer here. Or if you are a customer trying to make sense of your policy, you may find the answers here as well. So, welcome aboard. And if you do like this type of content, please hit the subscribe button and click on the bell notification icon so that you know when this guy comes out with something new. Also, don't be afraid to leave a like on my channel. We would love to hear your comments and suggestions. But without further ado, let's get started on our promised content for today. Shall we? Now, what we're going to talk about today is AON, also known as AOG. Teka lang, Miguel. Are these two different things or do they mean the same thing? Don't worry, they mean the same thing. AONs, AOGs. It just depends on who you're talking to. If they want to call it AON, if they want to call it AOG. You cannot have two different, may section ka na ng AON, may section ka pa ng AOG sa isang policy. No, that's not gonna happen. Don't worry about that. If you've already got one, you're good to go. But what is AON and AOG exactly? AON slash AOG exactly. And the funny thing about this is that even if you look inside the insurance code of the Philippines and did the search for acts of nature or acts of God, you won't really find any mentions of such terms in the insurance code. And that will lead us to point number one. Since there's no specific definition of what AON or AOG is as per the insurance code of the Philippines, that means it's up to the insurers, it's up to the providers of insurance how they define acts of nature or acts of God. That means it's going to be very very specific for your case. It's going to be very very specific for your policy, which means you have to pay careful attention to how it is worded as per your policy. Does that mean one insurance policy could have different interpretations from the other? Most probably. But something very, very important to note though is that most insurers, especially the big boys in the field, will have around roughly the same type of definition as to what an act of nature or as to what an act of God is. You'll see the terms earthquake, typhoon, flood, even volcanic eruption mentioned in their definitions of AON. But you may want to disregard these terms because there is a blanket term for that, and you want to make sure that that your insurance mentions that as well. Convulsions of nature. That's the term. So your insurance policy should enumerate them. You've got your earthquake, typhoon, flood, volcanic eruption, and other convulsions of nature, which will blanket almost everything under that specific category. Now, before you start scratching your head, I know what you're saying. What the hell is a convulsion of nature? Well, let's break down the term then, shall we? While there is no definite definition to what a convulsion of nature is specifically means, we can break down the term, especially the term convulsion. What do we mean when we say convulsion? And a quick look at the dictionary gives you sort of a medical a medical approach to that. Let me just pull that up really quick. Convulsion, an intense paroxysmal what the hell? Involuntary muscular contraction. Ano daw? Well, it seems that it's the term convulsion is attributed to something involuntary, something that is beyond the control of your custodian, beyond the control of anyone. And I think that's a pretty accurate description of what an act of God or an act of nature is. Something beyond the control of your customer, despite taking precautionary actions, despite taking care, being cautious. That's what we mean when we say it's an act of nature. Something completely beyond the control of your customer, and that uh, is a pretty big umbrella, which is why our first point, like I said earlier, is that you have to be very 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 specific as to what it is how it is mentioned, how it is delivered in your policy. And that's point number one. And that takes us to point number two, which digs us deeper into the rabbit hole. When you see the term convulsions of nature, most people think that it is mostly catastrophic. And that's true. When we say convulsions of nature, the first things that come to mind are your typhoons, your big earthquakes, your landslides and whatnot. And that's technically correct. Yes, that's the main function of convulsions of nature. Why convulsions of nature have been mentioned in AON and AOG coverage. Yep, that's given. However, convulsions of nature don't just refer to these sorts of things. While they constitute the majority of these things, they're not the entirety. As you'll find out, there are certain cases, minor cases, although there isn't a storm, there isn't a typhoon, there isn't an earthquake, something can still be considered a convulsion of nature. And you'll be very surprised to know. Like, for example, parking your car underneath a coconut tree. And then by some unknown mysterious force, nalaglagan ng coconut ang inyong windshield. No, 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 no. That's not covered under Section 3, your own damage coverage. No, that is covered under AON. Because the falling of that coconut on your windshield, on your car, something completely something completely outside of your control. No one told the coconut to drop on your car. It just did. Minalas lang po talaga. And I think that's one of the best ways to explain acts of nature, acts of God to your to your customers. Para sa tunay na malas. But yes, it is true, so to speak. If you want to put it in simpler terms, if you want to put it in layman's terms, it is really for things outside your customer's control, major or minor, which actually is very important. It's a very important thing to consider when you are deciding whether or not to have AON included in your policy, because the decision to include or exclude AON in your policy brings us to point number three, which dictates that AON AOG is a voluntary coverage. Now, what do I mean when I say voluntary? Hindi po siya sa pilitan. You can have it and you can do without it. It really depends on your willingness to pay the additional premium. And yes, may additional premiums po yan. It's not one of the four major sections mandated by the IC, si CTPL, si no fault indemnity, si own damage, and si excess TPL. AON AOG is not part of that. And therefore, should you choose to have it, should you choose to have it included in your policy, there will be a corresponding additional premium to be incorporated into the account because it will cover the whole vehicle from these specific circumstances. Parts, even the whole vehicle itself, if it results in a total loss and the vehicle needs to be replaced. So it is a pretty unique cover. It's a pretty interesting cover. It's a pretty useful cover, but by no means is it is it cheap. So to have AON AOG included in your policy, it's gonna put a pretty sum in addition to your motor car insurance policy. Pero teka lang, Miguel. Bakit yung insurer ko binibigay ng libre yung AON AOG? Like I said, the definition of AOG differs from insurance to insurance, from provider to provider, since it's not something mandated by the Insurance Commission. So you really have to take a good look at their definition of AOG and AOG as it is defined in your policy to really get a good scope of what is being provided. And that should give you a good note as to how seriously the company defines AOG, when you're not going to be covered when something happens to you, which is a tip for everyone who already has AON or AOG coverage already. Try to take a good look at your policy and see how it is defined. Does it just specify the types of convulsions that's covered? Earthquake, typhoon, flood, volcanic eruption lang? Or does it include that whole term, convulsions of nature? You may want to keep an eye out for that para malinaw po ang pagkakaintindi ng ating policy. So, with that being said, let's wrap up our discussion for today. 3 things you need to know about AOG. Number 1 is that it is not found in the insurance code, and therefore it can be defined differently in your policy. So you have to be very specific and very much aware of how it is worded in there, because that is what the company's promise to you is. So you will have to watch out for that. Number two, if it says that it covers convulsions of nature, you'll be very pleased to know that these convulsions of nature don't just apply to catastrophic incidences, but it also applies to minor incidents that are still, by nature, beyond the control of your customer. They can still be considered as acts of nature. So don't just think about catastrophic incidences, think about every type of misfortunate, unfortunate incident that could happen to you. And then finally, with these features mentioned about AON, AOG, it's important to know that it is a voluntary cover. You can do with it, you can do without it. Of course, with considerations to your budget and of course considerations to your personal preferences. And with that being said, once again, thank you so much for joining us today. This is Miguel. I hope you learned something new. And if there is a question or topic that you are interested in learning about, please leave a comment under our videos. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to talk about. And I'll probably make a video about it soon. We would love to hear your comments and suggestions. All right. So, for one last time, once again, this is Miguel. Happy to have you here. I hope that you guys enjoy the rest of your day.